So I'm going to switch over to 3DESIGN real quick. All right, and we're just going to jump right into a new project. And the first thing I always do when I start a new project, I like to make sure that I've gone ahead and saved the file so I know that the autosaves are kicked on and I can just quickly save it as I go. I'm going to do a save as and name this file. There we go. All right, so a lot of times we'll start a design with a sketch or drawing or photos or anything like that. I've made this pendant before, so I cheated and used the technical draft function to create a nice little drawing for me for reference. So I'm going to bring that in first using the image and plane tool, the very last tool in the main toolbar here. And we'll load that up. Clicking this little box here with the X on it and clicking right there. So one thing you can do with these images is create a reference size. So since I know the diameter of my pendant that I want it to be, I'm going to go ahead and turn on reference radius. And then I'm just going to use this little circle here and try to line it up to the edge of my pendant as best as possible. I should probably center my image first, huh? Start there. And that looks pretty darn close. And then I'm going to type in the reference size that I want this pendant to be. So I have 40 millimeters for the diameter. So when you use that and I validate, it's going to go ahead and resize the image so that that circle is exactly 40 millimeters. Oh, nice little trick with using your reference images. So it's always a good idea to freeze that image so you don't accidentally click on it when you're working on top of it. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to take a look at the plan here. Okay. So just have a list of some of the tools we're going to be using for this first section. We're going to build the overall pendant and the channel of pave around the sides of that. And we can see first we're going to revolve our shape to create the overall shape of the pendant. And then we will cut out portions of that and build our channel and stones around that. So from there, I know I need to create the section that we're going to revolve around the center. So for that, I'm going to go into a sketch in the OXZ plane, that's the front view plane, and create a new sketch. Okay. And then what I like to do here is I'm going to create 2 ellipses to create the shape. And I'm going to need to split those and also line them up evenly. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and create 2 lines down the center, one going this direction and one going the opposite direction. So I'm just using line segment from midpoint, like so. That way I can snap to those lines, plus I'll use those same lines to do my cutting of those ellipses in a second. So I'm going to create my first ellipse. And what I'm going to do is just snap the points right on that line. And then, of course, I can shape and size this the way I want. So I've determined that it's going to be obviously 40 millimeters across, and I want the height of this guy to be 7 millimeters, like so. And we'll do another ellipse, excuse me, the same way. Just make sure those are snapped to those lines. And this one's going to be a bit smaller. It's going to be 35 by 4. So 35 across and 4 height. There we go. That's going to give me the thickness I want for my pendant right here. And because I'm only going to revolve this quarter here around the center axis, I need to get rid of the other third. So I'm going to use, I could use my trim curve and trim out all the extra lines, but a nicer way of doing it, the way I like to do it is I'm going to do a split curve. So I'm going to choose the curve I want to split, which is this outer ellipse, go into split curves, and then use this little box here to add which curves I want to cut that ellipse with. So I'm going to add that one and validate that. And you can see I've split off that section. Put that back here, and we're going to do the same thing with the inside ellipse. I'm going to do a split curves, and we're going to add my 2 cut lines like so. And now we have that one separated as well. So now I can just get rid of all of these extra lines. Okay, and then I'm just going to use a regular line to cap off this bottom here. And I'm going to take a look at that, and we see that that's 2.5 millimeters for the thickness there. So I'm not going to cap off this side because we're going to revolve it anyway, and these are exactly in the center, so we don't need a surface inside of there. It'll close up once we revolve around the center. I do need to join these all together, so since these are only 3 curves I have left in the sketch, I can just auto connect all of them together. And we have 1 curve. And that's pretty much it for sketching for now. We're going to exit the sketch mode. And we see there's our revolve curve. We're going to select that curve and go into the revolve tool. And it's chosen the y-axis by default, so we just need to change that. I'm going to use our new pull down menu here and choose the Z. So it's going around the correct axis. And validate that. And we have our base of our pendant here. I'm going to hide this plane for now. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is start getting ready for the bottom part of the pendant, as well as the area that we're going to cut out and create our channel. So the first thing I need to do is get some curves that match this bottom surface, this flat area here. So what I'm going to do is go into our curve section with the part selected, and we're going to do a border curve or extract borders. And that way I can choose this bottom surface and then go into borders. With borders, you can choose offsets, so you don't have to get the exact border. It's great for if you're going to put something around the edge, but you don't want it right on the corner, things like that. So yeah, let me reset it. Sometimes it disappears. It's nice to see that border here. There we go. Okay, so I'm just leaving it 0, get the exact edges for this one. Validate that. And we have our 2 border curves. So they are together in this case. I want them separate, so I'm going to ungroup them. So in the group section, you can actually just do an ungroup on border curves, and it will separate them, hiding the original border curve into 2 elements or 2 separate curves. Okay. So next we're going to use this to create the bottom part of our pendant here. So I'm going to select those 2 edges or curves, and we're going to go into extrude. Okay. So the extrusion by default is going up in the Z. I want to reverse that so that we're going to extrude down from that area. So we're going to go ahead and hit this little dot next to the Z for the sweeping direction, and that'll go negative. And I want this to be 1.5 millimeters. Now we'll go ahead and validate that. And we see there's the bottom border of our pendant down there. Okay. Next up, I need to find the center of that line. Let me hide this little bottom section of the pendant, and I'm going to take this outside edge here, and we're going to offset that. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that using the modify curves here in the solid mode. So selecting that curve and modifying it, you have a lot of options for reversing the curve and rebuilding the curve, linking it to support, all kinds of things in here. The one I want to use is offset. And we're going to create my offset. Let me freeze this so you can see a little better here. And it's going this direction by default, so I want it to go the opposite direction. And how much of an offset we want. So that's going to be 1.25, since we know that that bottom is 2.5. Okay. And then we just validate that, and we have our new curve that's offset. Okay. Next thing I'm gonna do, let me bring back my revolve here, and I need to use this top surface. That's where we're gonna kind of use as a kind of a false surface to project all of our curves and create everything on. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the solid here and use copy faces and just choose that dome faced on the top of this. Validate that, and we'll hide the revolve. Okay. So we're going to use this as a support basically to create everything onto, because our pendant is actually hollow, but instead of creating it solid and cutting everything away, we're going to use this as a base to create everything on top of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is take that offset curve I created and select both of those, the surface, and we're going to do a curve projection. So with curve projection, we can project a curve in any axis direction. And by default, it's going Z down here. So again, I'm going to just switch it using this little button. So I want to make sure this little blue arrow is pointing towards the surface that I'm projecting onto. We can preview that and see that it's projecting there straight up into that surface. And that's pretty much it. We'll validate that. And we have our center line curve where our channel is going to go. Okay. So let me hide this for a second, and we're going to go ahead and put the parts of our pendant together, and then we'll use these curves. I'm going to cut the inside out and then start creating our channel from that. So we're going to bring back our revolve and our extrusion. So with the revolve and the extrusion, you see that we have that surface in the bottom between these two. There's two surfaces there. And the Boolean operations, especially in V11 and improvements, it'll usually remove that no problem. But I personally like to go ahead and just remove those and weld it instead of Boolean. So since I know those edges are all perfectly matched up, that's going to give me a clean solid every time. So let me hide this one, and we're going to go ahead and just remove this face. So under surface controls, remove faces. We're going to select it there and just validate that. That's going to get rid of that interface. Okay. Then I'm going to hide the top one and bring back the extrusion so I can do the same thing on this opposite face. And that one there. Okay. So you can see now it's going to be two halves all hollow, but they do match up at the seams. So we can now weld these together. So remember, Booleans for solids, welds for surfaces. So go into surface controls, take those two surfaces that match up and weld, and all you have to do is validate that. And now we have a nice solid. And we can do a polygon conversion check real quick to see that should be nice and clean. So we should have no problems cutting away from that and adding to it. Cancel that polygon conversion. Okay. Now we need to crop out the inside of our pendant, and we're going to use the border curve number 2. So a little easier to find in the tree sometimes. So element number 2 of those border curve ungroup, and that's what we're going to crop this with. So I'm going to go ahead and select the solid, and we'll go into special effects, crop and punch. Carla's asking why I use weld instead of Boolean. I could just use a Boolean and let the computer remove those, the algorithm remove those faces, just because I know those faces are on top of each other. It's going to have to kind of move some things around to get that Boolean nice and clean. And most of the time it'll do it just fine, but just personally, I like to, if I know that I can weld it, I'll weld it instead. But yeah, you could definitely just Boolean those two together. It's probably going to be just fine. I just wanted to show different techniques to get to the same method. Okay, so I have my inside border selected. That's the hole that I'm going to cut out of this. And I have the solid selected. I'm going to go into crop and punch. And if you're never sure which is going to be a crop or a punch, crop is going to remove whatever's inside your closed planar curve. Punch is going to be outside. But you can go ahead and validate it. And if it's the wrong part, just undo that and you can select the opposite. So it's going to be one of the two. You got a 50-50 chance you got it right. Let me hide this curve now. Okay, so there's the bezel, outer bezel of my pendant. And we're ready to just start creating our channel. So this can be the most involved part. When you're creating micro settings, there is quite a lot to it, lots of cuts we need to make. So we'll just take this step at a time. First thing we need is our positions for the stones. So we're going to use a variable channel. So I'm going to select that projected curve that I created. That's the middle of our bezel here. And we're going to switch over to the jeweler's workbench. And variable channel is in the jeweling section. And you can see it's already starting to line up some stones. I'm going to freeze this so you can see inside there. Okay. And this first tab is where we choose how the layout of my stones is going to be. So I do want them to follow support orientation so they're not laying flat. So we'll leave that on. You can reverse the curve, which reverses it in this direction. So it'll put the stones upside down. That's usually to fix if your curve is backwards. You don't have to go fix the curve. You can just reverse it here in the tool. Most of the time it's already correct. You can also change the starting point. So which side of the starting point you want to start from reverses the curve direction the other way. Okay. So spread strategy and spacing. So in this case, anytime you're doing a closed curve like this, you want the stones to go all the way around. You don't want any gaps in the where the end and the beginning meet up. You want to use adjustable space. So that's going to fill the entire curve and adjust the space evenly all the way around. Okay. And then for this one, I want my spacing to be 0.3 between each stone. Okay. And then we'll go on to the second tab here and choose my stone size and number of stones. So I'm going to be putting some 2mm stones in here. And the number of stones, I'm just going to put a really large number because I don't care if I go over. It will give me this little warning that I've got more stones that will fit, but if you do that, you'll know that it's filling in as many possible stones that it can. And it should be nice and even. Okay, so we're not going to actually use the channel cutter for this since we're not doing a traditional channel. We just want the positions for this variable channel, so we can go ahead and just validate. And we find our stone positions are ready to go. Okay. So before we can get started on our multi-cutters, not multi-cutters, sorry, the micro settings, I need to create the shapes that we're going to be cutting between the stones and between the claws. So I'm going to go into another sketch here. Actually, I already have a sketch in the front view. I'm just going to reuse this one. And we're going to draw the shapes we need. Okay, so this is going to be the cut that goes between the stones. I'm going to use a symmetrical vertical curve. And we're going to create kind of a like bicycle seat shape that goes down like this. Let me move this up a bit so I have room for my other curve. And it doesn't need to be that large. There we go. Okay, so we're just going to shape this into a bit of a cut like that. And for the other shape, this is the shape that's going to split the claws on top of the stones. We're going to do another one. And it's going to be more of a shape like that. Okay, so those are two curves I'm going to use. And back out of the sketch there, and we will go ahead and start setting up our micro setting. So for micro setting, we need to choose the stone positions. Oh, real quick, I can go ahead and put my stones in here so I don't forget about it for later. Make sure that's on the right plane. Okay, and since I've already set the size of the stones here, we're just going to create a little round stone. It doesn't matter what size it is because it'll scale automatically. I'm going to select that stone and my jeweling positions, that's the channel here, and we'll go into jeweling and use the actual jeweling tool to place those stones. And we don't need to filter or change anything in here. We're just going to go ahead and validate that. Okay. So go ahead and hide those for now. And now we're ready to do our micro settings. So in the, I still have a hard time finding it. There we go. In the prong section, this is the micro setting tool. Okay, so the first thing I need to do, I've already chosen my path when I or not really a path, but I've already chosen where the microsetting is going to go when I pre-chose my variable channel for the list of positions. I do need to add the section that we're going to work with. So I'm going to start with this one that's going in between the stones, and that is the default. We can put them on the stones. That's the cut that goes across the stones, or the one that goes between. So we are going to do these as two separate tools, though. So we'll start with this one. That's the longer, thinner shape. And we're going to go into the parameters tab. Okay. And we can adjust these using the parameters, or we can just kind of use the arrow. So I want to make sure that's long enough. It's definitely going across my bezel there. Okay. I'm going to use the constraint for the width computation. It's just going to keep the shape constrained the way I drew it. Okay. I want a bit more overlap. I'm going to just put my mouse cursor inside this box here and roll it up here. And I'm going to flip over here for you so we can see. Now, a little trick you can do, sometimes these little viewport shortcuts that'll flip the view for you will have a little rotation in there so you can flip around automatically. This one doesn't, so I'm going to use my arcs here inside my compass so that I can rotate this evenly. And then using the Y, so I can kind of see what I'm doing from that side a little better. Okay. And so overlap here is changing the width. That's how much it's overlapping the stone. Okay. And I want a 0.8 or so. That should be plenty. Okay. And then the height, it definitely needs to be much taller. I'm going to raise that up. And the Z offset will raise the entire shape up so that I'm only cutting the area that I want to cut. So this little shape here, I think it's a little too wide. There we go. Now we can always adjust this, of course, since it is parametric. We can come back to this once we get the other shapes in there. We might need to adjust it further. One last thing I want to do is I want to, because this surface is round, it's not flat, I want this to be a little more even to match the surface. There is a bending you can do in here. That's this angle here. You can bend it manually. I want to do about 5 degrees, just from experience there. I know that should be plenty. And then we can go ahead and validate this. Okay, so that's going to give us our first set of cutters. Now we need to repeat that to do the other shape for the ones on top of the stones. We save that. Now, I don't want to have to, do all of those steps over again. So there is a nice little trick we can do. I want to reuse what I just put in there for this one, but I just want to swap it out for this curve. So what I'm going to do is take that micro setting that we just created in the tree here, right click it, and I'm going to create a twin copy. Okay, so now we have a whole nother set using the same parameters. And what I can do is now change the section curve to this other section, like so. Flip around here again. Okay, so, and by default it is between the stones. I'm just going to switch this one to on stones. And just like that, I've got most of it set up ready to go for the on stone cut. So I just need to make those changes to this twin copy. Okay, so back in the parameters, I'm going to adjust the width a little bit and the height just a little bit, and then bring it up. Okay. So that's the cut I want. Now, having that in there, I'm gonna go ahead and validate that. You can see that getting a little thin where my claws are gonna be. So this is where I was saying I can go back to the original copy with the in-betweens, and we'll make some further adjustments to it. So you can see I don't need as much overlap. I'm just using my mouse wheel to kind of adjust this so it kind of sits inside there like so. And there's my split for the claws. Okay. So there's the first two pieces we need to cut to create these micro settings. So I'm going to hide those real quick. I am just using my spacebar shortcut. By selecting those, you can quickly hide them. And now I need to do the cut that's going to go along the path of that variable channel that's going to split it the other direction. For that, you can use multi-pipe, which is in the solid module under the construct tools. And you could just use a square or a circle to cut it out. I find that I have more Boolean problems with there. Sometimes it works just fine, sometimes it doesn't. And let me show you the difference here. So with multi-pipe, it's basically just a shortcut for sweeping. It just has some built-in sections. You can draw your own sections. You can use circles, squares, etc. So let's say we want a 1 millimeter just pipe to cut out of there to split the claws going the other direction. But sometimes it's better to just sweep it because you can see I have no control and I can't really see how well those sections are laid out there. And I know sometimes on a projected curve or any kind of non-planar curve, you might have some weirdness with where the start and end points meet. Sometimes they'll twist up, sometimes your sections will gather, and you don't really see that. So you get into some Boolean problems later and you don't know where it came from. A lot of times it might be for this multi-pipe. So what I like to do is just go ahead and sweep it so I can see. And I'm actually just going to use that same shape I used for the other section. So we're going to select that path again, and I'm going to sweep it instead. So just using regular curve sweeping. And we'll add this section. Actually, no, if I do it that way, we're going to not have a scaling. Let me draw. There's a reason I drew this before. I'm going to go ahead and draw that new shape I want to cut out of here. That way I can go ahead and have a scale to it. And I want this to be 1 by 1. Oh, turn off proportional. There we go. That'll be my cross section for this one. All right, so grab that path. I'm going to choose curve sweeping. Second tab, we're going to select the section. That's this new little one here. And if I come over here where the start point is, I can actually see how those are kind of bundling up at the seams of this curve. So that could be where it's causing problems with the multi-pipe. So again, why I like to sweep this one, I can see that. If I put on precise, that's going to give me spread out my sections more evenly, something that I can't do in the multi-pipe. So if you're ever having a problem cutting, Boolean, subtracting your multi-pipes, try doing a sweep instead. Sometimes that'll be where the problem is. You just miss it because you don't actually see that in that shortcut kind of tool. Okay, so with precise on, we'll go ahead and validate and sweep that, and we know we have a nice clean sweep here. That's going to be save me some trouble later if the Booleans get difficult. So, and then we have one more step, and that's to create the ajours for the bottom side. So we're actually going to use the honeycomb tool for that. Let me hide this temporarily. Okay. And for my honeycombs, let me bring back my crop and punch here. Okay, and for the honeycomb, it helps to give it some borders. Yeah, Robert says you can also use the sweeping wizard for this. Yes, definitely you can use the sweeping wizard. I could have done that and actually scaled it properly or without having to draw it a specific size too. So yeah, don't forget about sweeping wizard. If you're doing a simple one rail sweep, you can definitely control that. And yeah, having it match the top surface, it'll follow that surface direction more closely as well. So yeah, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that. That is going to give us a little more precision there. So sweeping wizard is in the jeweler's bench. It is in your ring creation tools. We've got the 2-rail, the 3-rail. Basically, this is going to be your 1-rail wizard. And it works similarly. We already have chosen my curve projection here as the path. We go into the section list. I'm going to go ahead and add my little section. Oh, no, sorry. We add a generic section first. It's just a space holder. And then we need to actually choose the curve here for section. Okay. And as he mentioned, you can see that it does match up the surface direction automatically. I don't need to rotate it. The nice thing is I can rotate it. Let's say the only thing here is if I don't position my curve a specific way, it's going to use the start point. So I will have to manually also move that. So not a problem though, because you have precise control of your sections here. I don't find that that angle is exactly where I wanted it either. But the nice thing about the sweeping wizard is it does have built-in move, rotate, and scale in here, as well as symmetries and alignments and all kinds of fun stuff. So either way works. You'll find, in oh, why am I getting a weird sweep today? Your projection. Thanks, Robert, for throwing a wrench in my plans. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's good to see you troubleshooting. I'm not sure what's going on here. Let me hide this for a second. Yep, it's sweeping across the center. And again, this is where things can get weird with projected curves sometimes. It's wanting to somehow sweep across the center. A very odd one. Okay. Did I choose something wrong here? Section list. Yeah, definitely a weird one. Okay, I'm gonna go back to just sweeping it for now. I will have to do some research on that one. Okay, so for now we'll just sweep it. Ah, yeah, linking the curve to support. It should have been because it was projected. I could try that. Let me try it real quick. That's why we do these together. Good to see how I have to troubleshoot as well. And this is what I do when I get your guys' file as Word-Desk edit. Figure out what's going on with these weird little things. So we're gonna do sweeping wizard, or sorry, crop and punch. So what Chris has mentioned, yeah, yeah, you could use just a circle and draw the circle, but I did want to project it to because I'm using that curve for multiple purposes. So again, like I said, that's where you run into the weirdnesses with these projected curves, how they the seams will interact with each other and things like that. So having different techniques is always good to fall back on if one thing's not working. But what Chris was mentioning is linking to support. So sometimes that support gets a little messed up. Again, because of those seams, sometimes you can just simply link it back. You can use the modify curves to do that, or you can just simply use the link to support tool here if you're not going to modify it any further. So just validate that. You don't see anything happen, but you do know that you have your new version, which is linked back to the support. Let's try that real quick with the sweeping wizard. Okay, so my link to support is now the path. I'm going to add my section and then choosing the shape I drew. And we're going to go ahead and freeze this so I can see here and flip around here. Okay, so, and now that I've linked to support, we see it's got a whole different direction. So now it's going this way. So you have to rotate it. Like so, and then it is more centered now, so that's good. And then move it down. And almost, we're still getting some seams in that curve causing some weirdness. So again, yeah, it's good to look at all these. Yeah, I don't think it would matter if I projected it down from the top or up from the bottom. In this case, like I said, I've kind of played around with this one, and because of the way it's cropped and the way those seams match up, this one gives me a little weirdness. So like I said, good to know different techniques. I'm just going to sweep it for now since I know that works. Rebuilding the curve, yeah, we can try that. That's another good troubleshooting step. Let's do that. So I'm going to go ahead and undo this link to support, and we'll do that. Let's do that real quick. We're going to modify the curve projection. And modify curves. Okay, so it's suggested to rebuild it. So we're going to use the simplify and rebuild option here. We're going to do rebuild. And let's give it a lot of points. Okay. So, that's a good idea. I still see, no, it's even now. So yeah, this might just work. And then I'll go ahead and anytime you make modifications to the curve, and you're using the support direction, it's a good idea to go ahead and link it back to that object, the crop and punch here. All right, so now we'll use my modify curves, and let's try this one more time. And we're going to do sweeping wizard, add our section, choose our section, and put this around here. All right, rotate this 90 and move it down. Ah, there we go. Sometimes I need reminders of all the little troubleshooting steps. So yeah, something to keep in mind. If you're having problems with a projected curve, a non-planar or non-sketch curve, rebuilding, relinking it, those kind of things can fix those little issues with the curve sometimes. So very good. Let's use this one. Okay. All right, now back to our honeycomb for the azures underneath. So a good idea for our azures is to have some curves and other things set up so we can control those shapes a little better. Yeah, I could have added a move, rotate, scale to that section and did a manual sweep and then rotated it as needed. So yeah, always different steps you can use. All right. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is set some more borders here for the bottom. I already have some borders on the edge, but I want to offset those a bit. So we're going to go into my curve section and choose the border curves here, extract borders. And we're going to go that bottom surface again, or this is a different bottom surface. And we're going to offset that just 0.1 millimeters. Actually, we're going to go 0.2, just a little bit inside the border here. Okay, go ahead and validate that. Okay, and then I'm ready to set up my honeycombs. Okay, so the positions for the honeycombs are going to be the same positions we use for the variable channel. And honeycomb is in the gemstone section here. I'm going to select that, and we see that these are going to turn blue, so I know that's where my honeycomb positions are going to be. You can actually filter these if you wanted to remove some of them from the honeycomb pattern. So sometimes you've got some really sharp corners of the edge of your pendant and things like that. So you may not want to cut the azures for those specific stones. You can filter those out just by highlighting them. Okay, but since this is all even round, not a problem. We can use all of them. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is choose a surface. You can choose the entire object as the surface, and it'll try to pick the correct surface for you. I find that it doesn't always work, so let me go ahead and create a surface at the bottom here. And I'm just going to copy that surface using the copy faces for this bottom surface that we just extracted those curves from. That way I know my honeycomb is going to point directly to that surface. And we can go back and relaunch this honeycomb tool. Okay, so I'm going to choose that surface I just created, that copy faces, like so. Okay, and then we want to use those border curves to help out keeping this constrained and shaped properly. So I'm going to also add my border curve number 2 here. Okay, and you can see that highlight. Okay, and once we set up all of that, we can now go into the cutters and see that they are already kind of taking place and shaping the way I want. And it's looking good. Okay, so a few more changes we're going to make in here is make sure that the depth is plenty. It's sticking out of the bottom, so that is good. The inside depth we'll check a little bit later once we start cutting things away. Okay, and then we also want to use the wall thickness here. So right here we have the cell wall thickness. This is going to choose how much space is in between each cutter. So that's going to be, after we cut it out, how thick those walls are going to be. So this is really thin here. I'm going to go to 0.7. Okay, that'll automatically scale those down, and now we have the same wall thickness. Now because I use those border curves, it's going to also have 0.7 on the outside as well, where the borders are. Okay, and to really make sure the angle and everything matches what I want here, I'm going to have it follow border curves as well. Okay, and you can see now they're even more precisely centered in there. So I find that's always the trick there, is to use those border curves and use those as guides to kind of shape these automatically and kind of constrain things. You get much nicer shapes. Chris asking, can we change the shape of the honeycombs? The honeycombs are they're that kind of shape that you get from them. You can change. So not really. If you wanted different shapes azures, you would use the regular azure instead of the honeycomb, where you can choose the cutter shapes. This one's just kind of using what you give it, the positions, the borders, the surfaces. It's using that to shape them automatically. So no, you can't shape this one. Okay, so validate our honeycomb here. Anyone else having the feed frozen on their screen? Nope. Okay. Yeah, not sure. Okay, yeah, must have been a hiccup on the connection. All right, so now we can start cutting this. I'm going to go ahead and save here. And the order you cut these can sometimes make a difference in the Booleans. But I like to do my sweep here first, this inside cut. Hide these for now. Okay, so I always save before I do any major Booleans just in case. And we do have some new options for Booleans. It's going to help with some of these more difficult Booleans. This isn't really a difficult Boolean, but you'll notice in V11 we now have this apply strategy on failure. Real quick, let me show you what that means. Okay, so before, the old behavior was you do a Boolean and it either succeeded or failed, and it would eventually, hopefully, just cancel out of it and give you some sort of failure. In V11, we've got two new strategies that it's going to try for you. And the default would be the random strategy and then along a grid. It's pretty technical, but basically when you have a Boolean, it's going to try to move some edges and surfaces around slightly if they're having problems. It will kind of randomize the order that it's trying to cut those surfaces and things like that. And then the other strategy is to do it along a grid, so it uses a very specific pattern. There's not one that's better than the other. Basically what I do is I use the move randomly as my default. And then if that fails, go back and try the other one. You can actually turn this off and it'll use the default strategy as well. So some different options you can play around with. So I'm finding Booleans in general have been improved quite a bit. So I'm finding less failures in general. But when you do get those really tough ones, you do have some options you can play around with in this new version. All right, so we are doing a subtraction here. So I'm subtracting my sweep from the crop and punch. Go ahead and validate that. And we have a problem already. All right, so let's see if any of our new strategies, I need to test this here real quick. I haven't done any Booleans yet to it, so there shouldn't be any problems. I just did this twice yesterday and I had none of these problems. That's always the fun part. Okay, so let's try this strategy. Yep. Yeah, I'm still having some weirdness with this sweeping wizard here and using that curve. Now it looks good. Let me test this. It looks fine. All right, well, we get to see one more technique. So as I think Julian suggested, let's go ahead and add a move, rotate, scale to this here. Like so, and then I'm just gonna go back to sweeping. So, get my original curve projection here. And sweep. Add our section. Use the move, rotate, scale one, precise. I find that is kind of my key there, is to be able to evenly, spread these out and ignoring where they kind of bunch up around the seams. And yep, go ahead and validate that. So now it is facing straight up and down because that's the way the section was drawn, but because I added this little move, rotate, scale in here, and rotate it like so, and rebuild. A little hard to see. I'm going here. Okay, so it is the wrong direction. Alignment's good. And it needs to go a little deeper, so I can just scale it. There we go. All right, now I got a lot of extra parts in here. Let's see, crop and punch. All right, let's try this. Subtract. And no problems there. Okay, so this is actually good that you got to see the troubleshooting steps, see the different methods to get to the same result, and sometimes depending on many different factors, like I said, a lot of times it's the seams, it's the projection onto those seams. Just the slightest little differences can make the difference on how those curves behave with different tools. So now we can move on to the rest of our cuts, and hopefully have no more Boolean issues with this one. Let's bring back our micro settings. Okay. So another, Robert has also mentioned this, another strategy, if you're having problems with these group cuttings like this, so this is actually just a group of many different cutters. Sometimes you can Boolean those to themselves, so it's one part and then Boolean it if you're having trouble. So, and again, I always save and then try it without worrying about that first. So we're going to do a Boolean subtract, and it's kind of cutting through pretty easily so far. I see, Julie. You were saying to create the as part of the original revolved area that I sketched earlier, to create the channel as part of the actual sketch and moving it there. That works as well, because then there would be no Boolean; it would already be revolved into that shape. So a little patience on this one. We just got to wait for it to cut through. There we go. So, and I do find if your cutters are set up like that, they're not touching each other, you've got some nice clean cuts. It takes a little time to process, but I usually don't have any problems with that part of it. We can check the polygons just to be sure. But yeah, maybe in earlier versions, especially 9 or earlier, I definitely wouldn't have cut all this at one time. But always improving. It'll take a little while to convert this model now that it's quite detailed, but there we go. And yeah, looking very good. And so those of you who are new, that polygon conversion is the same the same as when you export an STL as taking your model and converting it. I find it's a nice way to quickly see if it converts to polygons. That means there's no bad edges. There's no usually no problems there. If there was any, it would show up as bright red as some of those black lines. So it's a good way to kind of check as you're going instead of waiting to the end. Helps a lot with these troubleshooting steps. Okay, and then finally, I just need to cut out my jours and set up my honeycombs. I'm actually going to just use the honeycombs to cut behind there instead of doing cutters on top of these, just because the amount of cuts is getting pretty extreme here. Let's find my jeweling. Okay, and I'm going to freeze this here and back into my honeycombs. What I want to do is flip over here. I'm just going to bring the inside height up so that it's going to cut through, and that's where the stone is going to sit. We don't have to drill extra holes later. All right. Save, and one more cut, and then we can move on to the rest of this pendant here. There we go. And you can see the more complex the model gets, the longer it takes to update the screen there. But got some nice ajours, a nice micro setting. We're ready to create the inside of our pendant. So let's go ahead and save there. We'll take a look at. Oops. Part 2 of this. So for all of this kind of filigree, mill-grained parts for the inside here. Okay, so we're going to be doing a couple more sketches, some curve projection. I think the only tool that would be new for some of you more advanced users might be the Super Dome, which is one of our super action tools from V10. But we'll see that here in a moment. Okay, so let's go ahead and start on that. I'm going to go ahead and hide this first sketch. We're done with that for now. And hide that. Okay. Okay, and then we're going to draw in the default plane, the OXY. So looking from the top, I'm going to draw in the shape of the first little filigree piece we're going to start with. It's going to be a little curl with a regular NURBS curve, and it kind of starts right over here. Now, one thing you'll notice is because of the variableness of that channel, the filling the whole curve, it's not quite lined up the way I want it to be. So what I can do simply is, because this is just round, I can just rotate this, kind of center things more properly. So let's do that first so I can fix that. Okay. Now there's a couple ways we could do this. We can rotate them one at a time and just reuse the same settings to rotate the stones to keep them separate, or we can rotate them together, and we can always separate the stones using a filter. So I'm just going to do it together, and I just add a move rotate scale to that and rotate it along the Z. And if you want to be a little more precise, use that mouse trick here by rolling your mouse wheel inside that Z angle. And just line that up to the center. That way my filigree will be lined up to the center line instead of off a little bit. And then we're going to do a filter by type. Oh. All right. Okay, so this is where the good old webinar software starts to act up on me. Give me one sec. Let me just redo this here. There we go. Okay, so filter by type will filter your stones from the solid so they're back to their own group. And now we can draw in there. So yes, labeling your parts is always a good idea. I haven't been doing that today. And using the option to keep the names. I don't usually do that because most people don't have that option on by default, and I want to keep things as default as possible when I'm teaching and doing the videos. But yeah, I will show that in a more advanced technique. Okay, so moving on to my drawing here. All right, so there's my kind of first little filigree piece, like so. And what we're going to do is project this up into that surface, that copy faces that we made earlier. I know it's here in the tree, so I'm just going to select it there and do our curve projection. Okay, and so now you can see that surface that it's projecting to, it's going the opposite direction, so we're going to reverse that and project that up in there. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and draw the shape that I want to use as well. So I'm going to go back into that same sketch. And it's going to be a symmetrical vertical curve and just kind of a little dome shape like so. Okay, and then I want a sharp corner on the bottom part of this. So I'm going to hold Control for this last point, and that will snap it into a sharp corner. So we get the flat bottom like that. And then just kind of clean up the shape as I need. Okay, and then we're going to use our multi-pipe this time. Since it's an open curve, we shouldn't have any seam problems like we did with this whole earlier one. So this is where I find multi-pipe is just fine. And we're going to use the custom shape, which is the one I drew here. And we will resize it. Now, before I get too far into these parameters here, you see that it's going to align it to how it's sitting at 0 on the sketch that I drew. So it's not exactly where I want it to be. So there is a trick for that. Back in the sketch mode, we're going to use the positioning tool. So positioning, you'll find this in the solid mode as well, but I want to do it in sketch because that's going to affect how it sits along this curve. And if I use the translate tool, it's called positioning in solid mode, called translate over here, it's going to center the shape automatically, but also give me a little hand here where I can choose a different reference position. I want to reference the top point in the middle. So now the reference position of this curve is the 0, where it lines up to, is right at the tip of the shape. So you'll see when I go into my multi-cutter or multi-pipe, and I add my custom shape that is now translated to the right position, it's going to align it to the point that I had set. And that's where I have curve axis as the alignment. So curve center is the default. Use curve axis, it's going to use whatever point you referenced in the sketch. So a nice little trick for you for aligning your multi-pipes. So now I just need to size this. So it's going to be 1.5 here for the eyes, and 1.4, so something like that. And go ahead and validate that. So there's my first piece. Now we're going to adjust that curve. That's where we're going to use our parametrics to help with the design. We don't have to set this all up exactly where we want it to be, because once I start duplicating this, they might not overlap the way I want. Might have to adjust thicknesses and things like that. Okay, so before I get into duplicating though, let's go ahead and add everything we want to this first piece. And so we want to round off this end to make it look a little nicer. Now there is a rounding option in the multi-pipe tool. If we go here, we can change the either the beginning or the end of this to rounded. Okay, now depending on your shape, you're going to sometimes get some interesting results there. Not quite what I want. So another trick we're going to use is the super action tool. So it's here next to the bulging tools. We could use a bulge on this, but that's basically what the multi-pipe has built into it. Super bulge was something one of our application engineers programmed to kind of create these bulges from just using a curve. So I'm going to go ahead and extract the border, the end of my little filigree piece here, like so, and then we're going to super dome it. And just like that, it domes it out. Now, if I just click on any of these tabs here, we can use the move, rotate, scale tool. I just want to push that back so it's not sticking out too far. Preview that. And you can see sometimes you get a much nicer dome using that technique. And we'll just Boolean these two together. And there we go. Okay, next up we have is the little beads or Milgrain or however we want to do it. Create a little bead here using just a sphere. And that's going to be a 0.6 or so here. So just a little sphere at 0.6 millimeters. And I want it perfectly centered. That way I don't have to worry about the alignment when I duplicate it. And we're going to use that same path that we projected earlier to align my spheres. I'm going to do a graduated duplication. Graduated duplication has some options for changing the size and scaling of it, but it's anytime you want to repeat something along a curve. And the first thing we'll have to do is we see that my beads are going into my micro settings over here. Oh, and I have one more step too before I add these beads. Let's crop off the excess here for our filigree piece, because we don't want that going into the stone. So we're going to use that same border curve from earlier. That was element. Nope. Yeah, we ungrouped it. There was 2 elements. I used it up somewhere else. Yeah, this is why labeling is a good idea. Where is the other one? Okay. All right. Beauty of the new search and filter. I knew that was element number 2 from earlier. So let's use that. And this solid here, we're going to crop and punch this. And I want to punch it this time because I'm keeping what's inside that circle. You can see we use that same curve from earlier that we cropped the inside to crop the end of our filigree off. Oh, clear this. There we go. Okay, so now we can put our beads on there, and I'll talk about how to fix those beads hanging out off the end there. So graduated duplication. So what we can do is we don't want them to go past this area here, so we can add a margin. And I don't know how much margin, so I'm going to use my little roll the mouse wheel trick inside here in the beginning here and add a beginning margin and just move where it starts from, like so. Okay. And I'm happy with the other end, so I don't need a margin at the other end. And then we can adjust our reference space as needed if you want tighter, more Milgrain-like beads, or if you want them to be separate beads, you can do so. I want a little space in there just to ease on the operations later. So, oh, there we go. Yeah, just a little bit of more gap in there. All right, and we'll go ahead and Boolean those together. That way, when I duplicate this and I adjust it, all of those steps will adjust as I set these in here. So Boolean these together. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and do our mirror. So that's in the duplicate section, mirror, with the object selected. It's just going to pick the plane for me. Now it wants to put it on the opposite side here, so that's the wrong one. So I'm going to swap that plane. That should be the OYZ in this case. And again, if you use the little pull down menu here, you can just jump right in and grab those planes. Especially if you're not sure which one, it makes it easy to swap between them. Okay, so definitely have some overlap here. So let's fix that first. But we'll go ahead and do the mirror and just change the curve. We'll go back into this sketch here. And we see this needs to come in a little bit tighter to the side. And you can reload as you go. And if it's all put together cleanly, it should just reload. Okay. And again, this is what I find beauty of parametric designing is stuff like this, where you can just throw it in there and then make slight adjustments and less planning ahead to make sure these things are going to work. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing now with the circular duplication. So I'm going to create an array here by using circular duplication in the same section here. And for our design, we know we want 6 of these. So we're going to just do 6 copies around the OZ axis. And again, we see we have some overlap, so I have some more adjustments to do. So again, back to that curve. And we see that I made this way too big, so we need to bring it in. I'm going to bring back my sketch here. That's going to help with this. So this should be way up here. Now, obviously, you won't have a sketch if you haven't built it before, or you may have drawn one out. So you can always just eyeball this until it starts to look correct. There we go. Clean this up a bit. Oh. So just adjusting and reloading. I want them to meet up, touch, but not overlap so much. So we get a nice solid connection. So when we boolean it all together, it's going to be good to go. All right, next up, we're going to add some stones. Oh, no, sorry. One more thing. We're going to do the same thing for there's a little arc shape that holds our stones. We need to create that first. So I'm going to go back into that same OXY sketch we were using. And we're going to create an arc here. And I'm just going to line it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to line it up right here after this 7th bead. Something like that. And then I can adjust as needed. And we're just going to repeat the process we did for the other filigree shape. And we're going to project this onto that copy face from earlier. Curve projection. Make sure it's going up instead of down. And we're going to reuse the one we already did. So again, I don't want to have to go and sweep that or multi-pipe it and do all those steps. So that same trick we learned earlier, using a twin copy, we've already got all of that stuff set up for me. So in the in this multi-pipe here is what we're looking for. We need to reuse that. So I'm just going to look at its history real quick so I can remember the name. Again, I should be labeling things. Created on, okay. Yeah, we're going to just do a twin copy of before we cropped it. Sorry, it's much more organized the first time I did this. There we go. Boolean operation number 4. I'm just going to do a search for number 4. Nope. There we go. We'll just do a Boolean search, and we're going to create a twin copy of Boolean number 4. And then I'm going to go in the history of this new Boolean here. And change the multi-pipe to follow, instead of this curve here, we're going to follow this arc that we just drew. Nope, did that wrong. Nope, nope, nope. I just want to use the multi-pipe, not the whole thing. Okay, so we're going to that's what I meant to do. Okay, multi-pipe number 2, create a twin of that. and swap out the curve for the arc. There we go. That way my pipe is the same. I don't need to, I can redo the spheres. So we're going to do search for sphere. And I'm just going to select that sphere and the arc again and do our graduated. There we go, because it doesn't need the margins, or it needs different margins. So that's why I didn't need to find the modified version. There we go. And we'll just Boolean those two together. And we'll do our circular duplication. So we're just repeating that step. I just wanted to reuse the same multi-pipe settings. So I created a twin copy of that. Okay, 6 copies there. So now we're going to position our stones for the little stones that go in between this arc for our design. Well, we're an hour and a half in. Thanks for sticking with me. We went a little longer, but I'd like to finish this up. The rest of this goes pretty quick from here. So we're going to clear my search here, and we're going to use that same copy face we've been projecting onto. I'm going to create a pave just to easily make my stone positions in between those arcs. So we're going to go to the jeweler's bench with that copy face selected and do a advanced pave. Okay. And because I want 6 of them going around this center axis here, we can use symmetry with axis symmetry. And that axis is going to be the z-axis. This doesn't have a pull-down menu, so I'm going to use the axis here in the compass. It's a quick way to find your axis. We want the one that's going through the middle there. And we're going to do 6 copies. Okay. And then we're going to do 1.75 millimeters for this stone. Should fit. We might have to adjust it depending on how much size I have here, space I have. And we're going to just go here to the list of positions and add. And I'm going to flatten my piece here. I'm just going to add 1 stone, like so. And that's it. We're going to validate that. Okay. We're going to create our stone. I already have 1 stone in here that I can use. I'm going to grab that by searching for it, grab my positions, and go ahead and jewel these in. And there we go. Okay, and then for the bezel, this design has kind of an under bezel with claws. So, but we are going to use the bezel tool. So if I select this group of paved stones here, and we go right into bezel, it's only going to take account the very first one. Now, this is a repeating circular pattern. So the nice thing is that's not a problem. I'm just going to build the first one and then repeat that instead of trying to, position them one at a time. We've already got the position set up. So we'll go in here and adjust this bezel. Freeze here. See a little better inside there. And I'm going to start with, because this is an under bezel, it can be nice and round to match kind of our other shapes we've been using. And we're going to just adjust the height and the bottom a bit. And then in the first tab, back to the very first tab, we can adjust the scale of it and move it down below the stone. It's a little hard to see here. So it's going to be setting underneath the stone, connected to our little arcs and things here. There we go. Then something like that. I just need to check the bottom so it's not sticking out so much. Like so. Okay, so quick way you can use your bezels as kind of an undersetting. This needs to be a little thicker. Let's go in here. There we go. Something like that. And then we're just going to create claws. So I'm going to select that stone and using the claws portion of the gemstone setting here. I'm just going to put 4 by default. You can definitely go in and customize these a lot more. Definitely check out the claws videos and learn more about this tool. But simple, if we're just going to do some 4 prongs around this stone, we're going to start with the second tab here. And we're in the shape and size parameters. So I'm gonna leave it round. I'm gonna go ahead and round the tops. And then we just need to make it a little bit thinner. Don't wanna go any less than that. It's a little tiny stone though. And then going through the rest of the parameters, we can adjust the height. And the angle. So the top belt offset will push these out to angle them so we can set them a little better. And there we go. Obviously, we can build all kinds of different ways to set these in here, but this is just a quick way for a little under bezel with claws. I'm going to go ahead and Boolean those together, and then we'll circular duplicate those as well. Okay, so finishing up things here, we just have one more part and then the bail, and this should go pretty quickly. Oops. Okay, so for the centerpiece, a lot of the techniques we've already used. We need to get our curve and then create that. So I'm going to go into sketch again. I already have my OXY sketch here. And I'm going to use the cyclic curve. That way I can draw 4 corners at the same time, basically. So it's going to split both horizontally and vertically. And I'm going to start with the tip of this little shape here. And then I'm going to create a nice sharp point where I want the corner to be. Oop, did not want to sharpen. Oop. Why is my control key not working now? All right, we'll fix that. Okay, so this is going to go tuck right into here. Same thing here. I'm going to get rid of this extra point here. There we go. All right, something like that. We're going to project this up into our copy face, just like we've done before. Copy faces with the curve projection going up. We've seen this multiple times now. A lot of this is going to be rinse and repeat at this point. Okay. I'm going to use my multi-cutter from before, that multi-cutter number 2. Or sorry, I keep saying this, switching those. Multi-pipe number 2, we're going to create a twin copy of. And again, we're going to swap out the curve for this new curve, and we get the same thing. Now this one, I'm going to keep sharp angles, like so. So we get this nice sharp points there. Okay. And then for the plate in the inside, we're going to do, we can't extrude it because it's a non-planar curve. Take that last curve projection here, and we're going to do what's called a surface pullback. basically going to use the surface itself to create the top and bottom of this and then create a solid from it. So if we preview it here, you see that it's basically going to pull back that surface in both directions, 1 millimeter by default. That's definitely too much. And then extrude based on the surface direction, the outside, and that's going to put it all together. This doesn't work on really complicated detailed shapes. Yes, Carla, sharp points can be created while you're drawing by holding Control when you click on it. That's one of those. It's like, oh, didn't know I could do that. All right, so this needs to come down. And I find that depending on the direction you draw your curve, you'll notice that the bottom is actually moving the top and so on. So it depends on the curve direction. It's not really top and bottom, it's just one side or the other. So I'm just going to, come on now. There we go. Okay, so yeah, so the bottom is that one here. There we go. Something like that. Up to I need it to be a certain thickness though, so I can't go too much lower than that. So not a problem. We'll just add a move here. And we can just sink that down in there manually. All right. And then one more step, I'm going to create a stone. And that's going to be 3 millimeters in the center. And I'm going to reuse my bezel. So again, twin copy of the bezel. And we're just going to swap out the stone for the new one. And obviously there's a different size stone, but it gives me a kind of a head start. I get the same shape. I just need to go in here and adjust the scaling to fit this newer stone. And maybe the height as well. Something like that. Okay. And then because that plate behind here, I do need to quickly do a multi-cutter here. And I'm just going to use the default shape to subtract that cutter for the hole behind the stone. Yes, I created that surface pullback from the projected curve. Since I couldn't extrude a projected curve because it's no longer planar, it's based on the surface, that's where you want to use a surface pullback instead. Yep. All right, and then my claws, I can reuse my claws too. So I think the biggest thing to take away from this is reusing history from other items and creating new items from it. You do want to be careful when you're doing this because if I change too many aspects of the original, it will affect the twins. There's no way to split histories, unfortunately. So yeah, definitely be careful there if you're updating things. So create a copy of the claws, and we're just going to do the same thing I did before and add this stone and get rid of the original jeweling. And yeah, it's sometimes because the stone is different, it turned off the mirroring here. There we go. This might be a case where that history is not helping much because yeah, I could have just done a new claw. I'm have to set everything manually anyway. The top height's there. The offset got reset. So did it save much time? Not really, since it was a simple one to begin with. Okay, and then almost lunchtime, my stomach's growling. We have our bale. It's kind of a, looks like little insect antenna to me, but we have this kind of a duplicated sphere here with a little jump ring. So pretty simple. We're going to do I can reuse sketch number 2. Definitely need to clean this up. And it's just an arc. And then you can see here my stone positions are a little different here. I don't want it to go into that area. I want it to maybe come from here. We can always move it. We're going to have to move this around anyway. And this is going to use a sphere. And I want to make sure this starts off thick enough. So I'm just going to center this and probably start with a 0.5. Okay, so that sphere is under there somewhere. And we're going to do our graduated duplication. And then to get the scaling, we're just going to go to the scaling mode and turn on using a factor. Okay, and the first thing we see here is this is backwards. So this doesn't give me the choice to flip the curve here. So what we're going to have to do is go ahead and reverse the curve. So I don't really need to modify it in the solid mode since it's just going to be a simple reverse. So I'm just going to reverse it here in the sketch using the reverse curve tool. And grab that sphere, the curve, and do that graduated duplication. Oh, where's my object? Oh, I gotta reload that. Duplication. There we go. And now when we do our scaling, you can see it's going from the other end. And then adjust the reference space, smaller space, we'll get them to overlap, like so. And a simple jump ring. Like so. I'm just going to Boolean these together. And I'm going to move this into position. And finally, a mirror, and we are finished. No. Okay. Obviously, we need to Boolean this all together at this point, but I might go ahead and stop there. Yeah, you guys are awesome for hanging out this long, sticking with me through the troubleshooting. But I think that's really good to see. You know, even with my years and years of doing this, still gonna want to troubleshoot things.